What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Weed Eater brand trimmer, and the problem is that we just recently picked it up for free and now we need to try to get it running again. Let's take a good look at it to find out what's wrong with it and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this trimmer. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. So this was a free trimmer I found through Craigslist, and in the last video we found out the engine wouldn't start even manually priming it with fuel. After using a compression tester, we found out the compression was just too low for this engine to run. Now after examining the piston, we were able to figure out that the ring was just worn out and replaced it. After that, the compression was high enough that the engine now starts and runs when we put fuel into the carburetor's throat. Now let's see if we can get it working like it's supposed to. So the first obvious problem is the primer bulb is completely missing and the fuel lines need to be replaced as well. So we'll start by removing the old fuel lines and the carburetor and inspect it for any problems. Our second problem is the fuel cap. If you look at the underside of the cap, you can see a green rubber tip. This is a check valve that allows air to enter the tank but not allow fuel to leave. However, as you can see, there's a gap in the valve so fuel can now drip out. You can either replace the valve or the entire fuel cap. So here's what came out of the tank. There's some old broken fuel line, a splice, and the fuel filter. Now the filter is an important part of the fuel system. If it's obstructed or corroded internally, then it's going to cause some major problems. Now this one is bad enough that I'm not going to use it. Instead, I'll replace it with this one I got from another kit. The only problem is that it's sized for a rather large fuel line, so I'll probably use the splice to help change line sizes. Now this particular setup uses two different line sizes. The larger line is 3/16 of an inch for the return and 140 thousandths of an inch for the filter line. Hopefully I can get the larger line to fit over the filter. After removing the pumping side of the carburetor, we can see the gasket didn't stay with the top part of the carburetor, which is quite unusual. Now since it's free from the top plate, we can now inspect the diaphragm. What we need to check is that these two check valve flaps are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. The easiest way is to look at it from the side. Now this one is just fine, so I'll reuse it. If yours isn't parallel, you might want to consider buying a rebuild kit or a brand new carburetor. So here's the internal screen, and as you can see there's some debris on it, but it's not that bad. If yours is covered in debris, check to make sure that the filter is still connected to the fuel line in the tank. I'll clean the screen off in a bit, but first I want to check the metering diaphragm, which is underneath this plate. We want to make sure it's still pliable and isn't showing any signs of hardening. Well, after tapping on the diaphragm, it's pretty obvious that it's very petrified, so that means we need to replace it with a new one. Now, after removing it from the carburetor, the only thing we need to check is the stem length in the middle of the diaphragm. This one is a short stem, so make sure that the new one has a short stem as well. Now back to the screen, I want to put some fuel on it and see if it flows through the screen when I press the rocker arm on the other side of the carburetor. And unfortunately it's not flowing through, so that means we need to remove the needle and rocker arm assembly so we can safely clean the screen with carburetor cleaner. Just be very careful when you remove them because they're very small and easy to lose, especially the spring. After that, I can spray the screen with some carburetor cleaner to remove any old varnish that might be on it. So at some point the cleaner should flow through the screen, but if it's not doing it, try agitating the screen to break up some of the varnish. If that doesn't work, try using something a bit sturdier to agitate with. Now after a few seconds, you should see the cleaner disappear through the screen. You may have to do this multiple times. Now after spraying the needle passage on the other side, it's now time to do the same test, but this time I'll use fuel instead. As you can see, it's flowing just fine now, so I'll reassemble the carburetor. If your screen still isn't allowing fuel to flow through it, then you might have to remove the screen and soak it in some carburetor cleaner for several minutes. And if it still doesn't work, then you might want to replace the screen or maybe even consider replacing the entire carburetor. Another reason why this engine won't start is due to a carburetor that's clogged with old varnished fuel. Now the reason this happens most of the time is poor storage. It usually starts by using gas that has ethanol in it, then the equipment is put away with fuel still in the tank and the lines for a long period of time. After that, all sorts of problems can happen, from metal corrosion to metering diaphragms that stiffen to something like cardboard. Now to avoid this situation, try using additives to reduce the effects of ethanol and gas. If possible, use 100% gasoline with no ethanol. ethanol. Now, since the primer bulb was missing, I'll have to replace it. I purchased a package of 100 for just $10, so this primer bulb was really just 10 cents. Now, if you had to buy just one, I think it might be around $2 or $3. I would always suggest anyone to buy more than one and save the rest for another project. It's now time to replace the fuel lines. The first line I'm going to run is the filter line, and it's sized at 140 thousandths of an inch. The other line will be the return line, and it's a larger diameter at just 3/16ths of an inch. Now, I have seen these lines swapped before, where the larger line is the filter line instead of the smaller line. You can use either line for the return or the filter line. I've done it both ways and haven't had any problems, so if you want to try it the other way around, it's absolutely fine. Now, since the filter is larger than 140 thousandths, I'll use the splice to change the line over to a larger line. This will make it easier to install the filter. Just make sure there's enough line so that the filter reaches the other side of the fuel tank. So to run the return line, you pretty much do the same as the filter line, except you don't have to install a fuel filter. Now, it's up to you how much line you want to push into the tank. I usually push anywhere from ½ an inch to 1 inch into the tank. If you want more, it's completely up to you. So the smaller fuel line goes to the lower port on the carburetor, and the larger return line will go to the top port. Just be careful, because if you switch the lines around, the primer bulb will still work fine and the engine will still run, but the carburetor will be drawing fuel that's not filtered. What happens then is the internal screen will clog and the engine will stop, pretty much like it's running out of fuel, and then it won't start again because the carburetor won't be able to deliver fuel to the engine. Now it's time to prime the fuel system. Now, fuel should come up from the smaller line and fill the primer bulb. After that, it should return back to the fuel tank by the larger line. Now, the primer bulb took a lot of pressing for it to work, so I had to edit this section for time. Don't be surprised after rebuilding your carburetor, it may take several presses to see any fuel moving. And as you can see, the fuel, it's taking its time getting from the fuel tank into the carburetor, but it is working like it's supposed to. Now that we know the carburetor has fuel in it, I'll try starting it. So what just happened? Well, it didn't try and start in the full choke position, but instead it happened when I went to half choke, and then it died. What that's telling me is I don't have enough fuel, because it should have tried to start in the full choke position instead. What I want to try to do next is adjust the carburetor to deliver more fuel to the engine. On the front of the carburetor, you'll see the adjustment screws. However, to turn these, you'll need a special tool. Now, you could buy just one, or you could find kits that have several different types for $10 to $15 online. This particular carburetor requires the spline version, but yours might be different. So the screw closer to the engine is the L screw, and it's for low engine speed fuel adjustment, while the screw closer to the air filter is the H screw, and it's for high engine speed fuel adjustment. Now, I'm not trying to fine tune it yet, I'm just trying to get the engine to stay running so I can make my adjustments. Since I'm pretty sure the engine needs more fuel, I'll turn both screws counterclockwise about a quarter turn. Now, adding fuel at lower speeds will drop the engine speed, so to counteract that, I'll turn the idle adjustment screw clockwise a bit to keep the engine speed up. Then I'll start it again, and hopefully it tries to start in the full choke position and then stays running in the half choke position. So it did exactly what I was hoping for, which is try and start in the full choke position and then actually run in the half choke position. Let's try that again and see if it does the same thing. So it ran even longer this time, so I'm pretty confident that we still need to add just a little bit more fuel to get it to idle. Again, since it's dying at idle speed, I want to turn the L screw counterclockwise about a quarter turn to deliver more fuel. Then I'll try to start it again, and hopefully it won't die this time. Well, we got it to idle a lot longer this time, which meant that adding fuel at idle speed worked great. Now that the engine will idle for some time, I think I can try and tune the carburetor. But the first thing I need to do is make sure there's some line on the trimmer head. The trimmer line will add a small load on the engine, so I need to tune it with some on. Otherwise, if I tune it without it, then it may act differently when there's actual line on the head. So it was running really well, but the idle speed was a bit high, so I lowered it. However, I lowered it to a point that the engine wouldn't rev up and eventually died. I'll turn the screw clockwise a bit and then I'll start it back up. So the engine is running really well, but the only thing left now is to let the engine cool down and do a cold start, which I did off camera after filming. I did need to turn the L screw counterclockwise about 1/8 of a turn to clean up the idle, but otherwise it ran very well. I'll make a test run later on, hopefully lasting about 30 minutes, and then I'll do a compression test and see if it improves from the last time. So how much money did I spend and how long did it take to get this trimmer running in this video? Well, the primer bulb was bought in bulk, and for one of them it was only 10 cents. The metering diaphragm was also a bulk buy, and for just one of them it was only $1. Now the fuel filter was part of a kit, but if I had to price it, it'd be about $1.50. And even though there are two different fuel line sizes, the measured length was about 1 foot, so it comes out to about $2 of fuel line. And the air filter was also from a kit, and for just one of them it was only $1. So the total for this video was $5.60, and the repair took 1.5 hours. So my question is, would you revive a non-working trimmer if you had a few hours and several dollars to spend? Or does the brand still matter to you whether or not you're going to repair it? Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.